Hi everyone, my name is Anna. I'm an occupational therapist here at the LightHouse Arabia. It's a pleasure to be with you all on Zoom, on a webinar. Hopefully we will get to meet in person at some stage this year, hopefully. I'm really happy that you're all joining us today, and I'm really happy to do this collaboration. Today we're going to be talking about emotional regulation and how you can support that skill and building that skill with your own child or children at home. So before I share my screen, I'll just ask everyone, if possible, to keep yourselves on mute if you can, just because it might interfere with others being able to hear me. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. You can also write questions in the chat function on Zoom, and I will answer them. Or at the end, if you want to open up your camera and ask me directly some questions, I'm happy to do that. So before I share my screen, can I get a few emotions or reactions at the bottom of the page, just so everyone can let me know that they can hear me and see me okay? And then I will go ahead. Perfect, thank you. I can see some. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll get started. I should talk for maybe around 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. And there we go, let's get started. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about promoting emotional regulation at home. I guess this is one of my favorite topics because it's something that I work with quite closely with as an occupational therapist. Now, as an occupational therapist working here at the LightHouse, I do lots of different things. I work mainly with children, but I also work with teens and young adults. I do a lot of parent coaching, and I run a lot of our online services for the community. So community support, spreading mental health awareness. I'm really heavily engaged in our mental health first aid program as well. So I can talk a little bit about those at the end, but today you are here to talk about building and cultivating emotional regulation skills at home with your kids. So my hope is that by the end of this webinar, you will feel like you have a few extra tools in your parenting toolbox to be able to dive into the sea of emotions with your children. So without further ado, let's get into it. So for those of you who don't know anything about the LightHouse Arabia, we are a mental health and wellness clinic. We are based in the heart of Dubai in Sakim, Al Wasl. We do lots of different things here. We're well known for our psychology services. We have over 30 psychologists here at the moment who work with all ages, children, adults, couples, group therapy. We also have psychiatry, occupational therapy, that's me, and speech and language therapy. As I said, we do different services for all ages. We do a lot of free of charge support groups as well. So if you feel maybe that you're not ready for therapy or you want to get into a bit of a deeper understanding of mental health, I would encourage you to check us out on social media or our website to see the list of things that we do run for the community. These are some of the lovely people that I work with. We have a growing team. It's ever growing, and we're from all different parts of the world, and we have lots of different specialties. So let's get into it. Let's really get into why you guys are here today, and that is to talk about emotional regulation. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the why. I want to talk about why is it important? Why do you need to be mindful of emotional regulation skills, and how can you start working on that? Before we know how to start working on it, I really want you guys as parents to have a deeper understanding into what is emotional regulation. I then want to talk about how we can recognize a child that might not be able to regulate their emotions. We want to look at the development of emotional regulation, and then we want to talk about the real stuff, what you can actually do at home, and what are my top tips that you can take away and start implementing in your house. So why is it important? And I guess the way I like to describe this is that we want our kids to feel their feelings, okay? We want our kids to feel every feeling in the book, but we don't want our kids to become overwhelmed by their feelings. We want our kids to feel discouraged, but we don't want them to give up. We want our kids to feel anxious, just enough anxiety that they can respond appropriately to their worries. But we don't want them to have too much anxiety, and we definitely don't want them to have too little anxiety. We want that just right amount of anxiety. We want our kids to be excited, but not get so overwhelmed with enthusiasm that they make poor decisions and make poor choices in their activities of daily living. So what does it help us do? And it's not just behaviors. It's not just to get through the tantrums and the meltdowns. It helps so many things. So when a child can effectively manage their emotions, they can improve their attention. They can improve their academic performance in school. They are more resilient. They can resolve conflict with their peers or with their family. They can manage psychological and stress and all kinds of stress that comes in their path. They can manage the uncertain, things like the pandemic, things that any family might experience. And of course, I think it comes down to something that we want to see all our kids doing, and that is really thriving when it comes to their peer relationships. I think when I think about emotional regulation and self-regulation is that we needed to become more resilient. And that resilience that kids build when they develop emotional regulation skills is not just to get through certain things like the pandemic, but it's to get through anything, as I said. So whether it would be moving countries, moving schools, a loss, maybe your child is grieving something, grieving a person, grieving their old identity, but having those resilient skills will really support them when they need it. So what is it? So it is an intrinsic, an internal, and an external process that's responsible for identifying, processing, and responding to a particular situation with a response, an emotional response that is appropriate. But how can I simplify that a little bit? So it's ability to control one's emotions. So it's your child's ability to control their emotions and not have their emotions control them. Because when our emotions control us, we feel, we act, and only then we think about the consequence. Only then we think about, what have I done here? When our emotions control us, we find it really difficult to thrive in life. We get overwhelmed very easily. We don't see an answer. And sometimes we really need support with that. And that's where a parent, your support comes in. And I want to highlight here before I go into some of the tips and tricks is that it's not about feeling happy all the time. It's not about having a child who is very positive and is always happy and always social, because we want our kids to feel all the feelings. We cannot ever learn how to manage and accept feelings if we don't learn all of them. So when something bad happens or something sad happens, it's very normal that your child feels sad or feels angry or frustrated. And we do want to welcome those feelings. We actually want to welcome anger and frustration and anxiety, but we also want to teach our kids how they can respond, how they can grow, and how they can regulate these emotions. It's about opening up to the emotion, accepting the emotion, and then coming up with an appropriate response to that emotion. All right. I see some more people have joined, so welcome. Welcome with us here today. So when we look at emotional regulation, I want you to see it from this kind of triage. What it consists of is, and this sounds quite complex, but I will give you an example. So it's our awareness and our understanding and acceptance of our own emotions. It then looks at managing our emotions according to that situation. And every situation is very different, but that specific situation. And then it's that ability that we want our kids to have to control their impulsive behaviors. So control that negative thought, control that hand, control that leg, control whatever they have that's impulsive, okay? So I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a child called Kerry, and Kerry goes to school tomorrow and realizes that teacher has changed the bubbles. And this devastates Kerry because she sits beside her best friend at school and she looks forward to seeing her best friend, and this makes her happy and smile on the way to school. But when she gets in, she is overwhelmed with anger. Okay, so that's step one. She's accepting and she's identified that I am really angry with my teacher right now. The next thing that she has done is she manages to control her emotion. So instead of screaming, instead of kicking the chair, instead of getting very upset, she decides that she is going to control. So she's going to do maybe her deep breathing. She's going to reflect. She's going to hold in her tears if she wants to, and then she's going to approach her teacher. She's going to use her words and explain. I'm angry, teacher. Why did you do that? Explain. And then we have a process. We have an identification, we have an acceptance, and we have an ability to control and respond more appropriately. So it's not that Kerry is not angry and she's not telling people she's angry, but she is responding in a way that's socially acceptable and in a way that teacher can really help her grow, as you could say. So let's move on. So what are some of the signs? Now, I know there's some of you probably thinking at the other side of your screens that this list is not extensive and you can definitely add to it as a parent, but there are many signs of when your child might be dysregulated. Some of those things might be extreme anger that isn't always justified or have a reason. Often the parents who come to me will say he or she goes from 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds. Often that's how we see it. We see these extreme bursts of emotions. Sometimes as parents, you might know the trigger. You might say, look, I know the trigger. It's when her brother takes that, or it's when I tell them it's bedtime, or it's when we have to do homework. But sometimes you might not think that there's an obvious trigger. It can be physical aggression. It can be pinching, pulling, hitting, slapping, all of those things. It can be impulsivity that might actually result in harmful risk-taking behaviors, even if it's through play. It can be swift movements between the far ends of the spectrum, as I've just mentioned. It can be kids who are extremely fearful beyond what is typical for their age. It can be difficulties during social interactions, and it can be avoidance. Kids can very easily suppress some of the emotions that they have, and they don't want to talk about it. These are the kids who bottle everything up, or sometimes these are the kids where, and I know there's one of you listening today that will identify with this because there always is, but these are the kids that parents might be really struggling with emotions at home. But when I ask them, what does teacher say about emotions? That parent will tell me, actually in school, he's fine. In school, she's doing an amazing job. Teacher has never said anything about this. And kids have this amazing ability to bottle up everything, to keep all of those things inside. Because they know that they want to behave a certain way in school. Even very young kids, they want to be the same as their peers. They want to talk the talk and walk the walk. But we have to be mindful that some kids then hold all this up like an iceberg and kind of a volcano, you could say. But when they do get home, then we see the explosion of emotions. We see emotions that have to come out because they've been hidden in and they're growing and growing. And unfortunately, you guys as the parents often see the other side of that, which can be very difficult to deal with at home. So how do they develop? Now, I love this. This is one of my favorite visuals, and any of you parents who know me, who've ever been to one of my talks, will know that I manage to bring this pyramid of learning into every webinar that I do, every single one, because for me, it represents a system that we need to understand, okay? When we look at the top of this developmental kind of world that we all have, we see those very high functioning skills, we see executive functioning skills, we see behavioral control, we see self-regulation. But we have to remember that all of those skills at the top are built on the foundations of everything underneath. So that comes down to things like sensory processing, our ability to take in different senses from the different sensory systems, to process them and respond in an appropriate way. It's the ability to explore through play. It's the ability to move. It's feedback. It's problem solving. And all of these little things are stacked on top of each other. And at the end, you have a child who can do all these things. And one of those things is emotional regulation. And that is why when I'm working with kids who maybe come in with a referral of emotional regulation difficulties or anger management or anxiety management, I will always look at their sensory processing because it's so heavily intertwined with emotional regulation that we can't really look at one without looking at the other. And I guess as a parent, I want you to remember that on top of all this, we can't just be looking at the behavior, as a bad behavior. We need to look at your child's behavior as some form of communication. And you also need to understand that your child's brain is still developing. So when we look at the developing brain, I want you to think of that the frontal lobe, and that frontal lobe is responsible for those higher executive functioning skills, the problem solving, the seeing the bigger picture, the time management, the ability to control our impulses, all of those things. So your child's frontal lobe is still developing, and the bad news is that brain will still be, that part of the brain is still developing until your child might be, late teens, maybe even young adults. So I don't want you to lose hope. There's plenty of things that you can do to support them, but definitely it is still developing. So we have to be mindful of that. So what I say to parents is, you have to let your child borrow your frontal lobe sometimes because it's not there yet or it's still developing. So be mindful of that. We have to take it one step at a time. So how can we cultivate these skills at home? And I guess this was something that this slide is kind of a get ready for the rest slide. So this slide is very general, but I think it's very important. I will go into the smaller details, but these are some points that I think are very helpful in giving you guys a kind of an overview. So before teaching the steps, look at these key practices. So we want to isolate the skill and provide practice. What do I mean by isolating the skill? So what I mean is that I want you to think about it as any other skill that we need to grow. I want you to stop thinking it of as maybe a bad behavior, and I want you to think of it as a skill that we need to grow, something that needs to be isolated and treated and nurtured until it grows. So just like it is new maths problems that you're teaching your kids or social skills, building emotional regulation skills need time and practice, and they're not going to happen by themselves. You'll get the notes home from the teachers, you'll get people calling you, you'll have the meltdowns in the mall, and you'll have no notice for those, but you need to build these times in order and isolate that skill and focus on it. Just like anything else, just like building your child's motor skills and fine motor and handwriting, but emotional regulation skills are something that need a lot of time and practice. Secondly, I want you to think about coaching your child through scaffolding. And what do I mean by scaffolding? I mean, don't avoid those difficult situations. Don't avoid that shop that always causes the meltdown. Don't avoid that cousin who really irritates your child or makes your child so excited that they just cannot cope with these explosion of emotions. We need to coach kids and provide as kind of a supported framework that we call scaffolding. And when they get better and they grow, we can increase the risk. Often I tell parents that we need to start at home, because I know what it's like. You're in the mall and something happens, and it's so much easier to just say, fine, here's the toy, stop crying, because if we give in, we're avoiding public humiliation in a way. But that's also teaching your child that I need to do all of those behaviors and scream louder and throw louder and all of these things. And eventually mom and dad is going to give in. And we call that the escalation trap. So the more you give in, the higher the behaviors get. So we don't want to do that. But I know it's hard in public, and I know it's hard in school as well. So we want to do it at home. We want to build in these problem-solving games. We want to practice waiting tolerance. We want to practice labeling emotions and working on emotions at home when your child can explode, and you can create this lovely window of learning and build on that for when they can generalize those skills out. Practice runs is next. What do I mean by this? I mean building the skills that your child needs to really grow. So if, for example, it's waiting for their favorite toy, or these kind of self-regulation skills that I need to do something in order to get something. So instead of giving your child the whole task taken away from them, for example, you can't have that until tomorrow. You can start by saying, look, I don't want you to cry. I don't want you to get very angry, but I need you to sit on the couch and show me really nice waiting skills for 1 minute, and the timer's on, and then I'm going to give it to you. You need to praise that behavior when they do it, and you need to reinforce that behavior. As your child gets better at the small things, you can increase that demand to bigger time limits or bigger kind of emotional triggers that your child might have. And what I want you to remember, and I always say this to parents, and this is probably the most important thing in any therapy or tools that we can give you, is that any attention that you give your child will increase. The more attention you give a behavior, the more the behavior will increase. Positive behaviors, amazing. So the more positive praise you give your kids for doing good things, the more good things that they will do. The more attention that you give the tantrums and the anger outbursts and those things, the more attention, even though it's negative attention, even though you might be showing them that you're not happy, and you might be giving consequences and that kind of thing, you're still going to see an increase in that behavior, because any attention gives an increase in the behavior. So what I'm saying is we really need to work on reinforcing and giving attention to the behaviors that we want to see, not the behaviors that we don't want to see. We want to encourage our kids to self-reflect. So when that tantrum happens, you might not be able to teach in that window. But when you have that time where your child is sitting down, maybe they've apologized, maybe you're teaching about why that was a wrong decision or what is a better decision, that's when you can really sit with your kid and kind of ask them to reflect, like, how do you think that made your other sister feel? Or how do you think that made mommy feel or daddy feel? You know, what can we do differently next time? Because we need to have, we can't just forget about it, because then we're never going to learn. So we need to go back. I always like to say to parents that instead of using time out for these behaviors, there's what we like to call as time in. And you can research this if you're interested in it, but it's kind of a lot of new evidence is showing that time in principles are much better. And time out is kind of has quite a negative connotation to it. It's quite shameful. Kids often feel quite concerned and down and kind of like they've done something very wrong. And there can be a lot of anxiety. There can be a lot of other emotions that we're promoting when we do time out. But when we do time in, we are concentrating on learning. It's a learning opportunity for your child. They're not in trouble. They're going to learn, and they come up with their own consequences. So, okay, you threw your toy, but that wasn't very good. But we haven't seen that behavior before. So let's learn from this. I'm going to tell you why we can't do it, and let's decide a consequence together next time you throw your toy. That way your child is very involved in the process, and they know what to expect then when you take away the toy next time. Okay? So let's move on. What are my 5 steps? And I changed these for this webinar because I did a little bit of extra research and I wanted to modify them to kind of suit the world that we are living in right now and what's happening all around us. So these are 5 steps that I would highly recommend for promoting emotional regulation at home. What are they? Number 1 is building the feelings vocab, okay? Number 2 is helping your child identify what those feelings look like on themselves. 3, we want to support them identify their triggers. 4, we want to model the behavior that we want to see. And 5, we want to build a toolbox of strategies. This is not a real box. This is a box that you use as strategies, an imaginary box. It's just a lot of strategies that you can find that work for your child. Now, I have to say that every child is different. Sometimes these strategies will really work for your child. Sometimes you'll find that some strategies won't. Sometimes we have a lot of sensory behaviors going on, and no matter what behavioral strategies you use, we still need to work on the behavioral things. So I think if you're ever unsure, is it behavioral or is it sensory? Is it a sensory meltdown or is it a tantrum? Reach out. We're happy to help and kind of guide you and better understand the function of the behavior first. So build the feelings vocab. So before your child can ever identify and learn to self-regulate and regulate their emotions, they need to know their emotions. Now, I don't know what age your child is, but you can start at a very young age. And as your child begins to expand their vocabulary, you can teach them what every feeling looks like. So, you know, most kids use happy, sad, angry, and excited, but we want to increase that as much as we can. We want to have different levels of anxiety, different levels of boredom. We want to make sure that they know what the feelings are, what do they look like on other people, and then we'll move on to what they look like on themselves. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we can be wasting our time if we're trying to teach strategies that are not targeted at a certain emotion. I had a little girl who came in and said, I'm so hungry. She was so hungry. Mom said, she's so hungry all the time. She's always telling me she's hungry, and it's always before we go on play dates. And she just kind of avoids them. And what we did was we did a really nice activity where we drew our emotions. We drew a girl and we drew all the different body parts. And we decided to find out where. I dove into her world. I went down to her level, and we really did some playful therapy. And she explained to me in her words that her tummy has a pain every time she goes on play dates. And when we explored this and we looked at what hunger means in food, and we looked at different emotions, what we realized is that this little girl was not hungry. She was actually worried. So that feeling was worry, that feeling was anxiety, and that was butterflies in her tummy. But she didn't know what that was. So she wasn't able to verbalize it, and she wasn't able to do anything about it. And mom was just feeding her. So we need to be mindful, and you need to align. Does your child actually know the emotion that they're saying means what it means? Okay, that's the first step, identification. And for those of you with older kids, there's a really nice visuals that you can get on Pinterest or online called a wheel of emotions. And we use this in the clinic with adults. When we're seeing adults for therapy. And the wheel of emotions will give you one emotion like anger, but it will give you a lot of different emotions that come under the umbrella of anger and all of those. So you can get some of them that are more child appropriate as well. Really nice idea to help your child identify. Step 2 is we need them to identify the feelings on themselves. So it's one thing knowing what a feeling is, and then it's another thing saying, I am angry, I am frustrated, I am not feeling okay. So they need to be able to identify that feeling on themselves. We like to call it, you have to name it to tame it. That is one of Dan Siegel's sayings. And for those of you who are looking for a good parenting book on emotions and understanding your child's brain, he has a lovely book called Parenting from the Inside Out, where he goes through, but he has different concepts, and one of them is name it to tame it. And what it means is we need to say our emotion out loud. We need to verbalize it in order to tame it. If we bottle it up, that feeling gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we often teach kids this. What we teach is, and for you guys to understand, even for your own emotions, that the minute, and this is research, this is not just me, Anna, talking, the minute we label our emotions, so the minute we say, I am angry, I'm really frustrated right now, that activity in the part of the brain responsible for that fight or flight response, which is called the amygdala, starts to reduce. Okay, so brain scan shows that when we actually communicate and name our feelings, they actually, part of the brain starts to slow down, responsible for that. It might not solve the problem. We still might need to do strategies, but we need to learn to verbally express how we are feeling if we want to actually open up and get through that emotion. Next, we need to support our kids identify their triggers. If your child, and if you don't know what is the trigger, then we can't really help it, okay? You need to help your child identify what are those stressful points. We don't really want to avoid these points, as I mentioned before, because when we avoid something, we actually exasperate that feeling, and that feeling can actually intensify and get bigger and bigger. So we do need to be mindful of what are those triggers. So you need to detect, put your detective cap on as a parent. What are the situations, the environments, or the sensations that cause stress? We always use a model called, and if you've ever been in contact with a behavioral therapist, they'll say the ABCs of behavior. And that's the antecedent is what happens before the behavior. The B is behavior, what is the behavior? And C is the consequence. So when you see your child screaming or having a tantrum, I want you next time to look, is there a buildup? You know, is there annoyed? Usually kids go from happy to annoyed to angry. So what happens antecedent? What is before? What is that before? Is it you saying no? Is it you saying, don't touch that? Is it someone calling them a certain name? So we can't change that behavior until we know what happens before it. Then you need to look at what is the behavior, and then you need to look at C, the consequence. How are you responding as a parent to that behavior? As I said before, if you are, say, raising your voice, or if you are taking them away from the activity, that's a lot of attention, and that might actually be increasing the behavior, not decreasing the behavior. So just be mindful of that. Start by noticing when and where your challenges present. If it's happening in school, your teacher will become your best friend. You need her to tell you everything about these behaviors, when they're happening, what they look like, and what she's doing after he or she does that thing. Identify the trigger. By identifying triggers, it can really empower you both to prepare ahead of time for greater success. So for example, I'll give you an example. I had a child today who gets very, very upset when our sessions finish. The minute I say, time to go home, mom's in reception or dad, and I get a very angry child. So I know the trigger is transitions. What do I do about that? I prepare him for the transition. I set the routine. I set the expectations. I get the child to repeat back to me, what are we doing? What are we doing after that? Yes, you're going to put your shoes on and we're going home. The child has to be able to understand what to expect. For this child as well, I'll give him a countdown. I'll say, okay, even though he does not understand the concept of time, I'll say we've 10 minutes left. And then what are we going to do? Yep, you're going to go home. We have 5 minutes, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I find that this child will transition very smoothly because I have set that expectation and I have broken down the trigger. Okay. Let's keep going. Number 4, we have model the behavior that you want to see. This is, if I said one of the previous slides was the most important slide, I take it back. It's this one. If you guys have been to any of our webinars in the Lighthouse, parenting webinars, you will see this slide. Okay, no matter what you try and do to fix your child, you will never be able to fix the behaviors until you look at yourself. Okay, we always say the airplane rule that you need to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help your child. The same thing happens here. You need to understand your own emotional regulation before you can help your child emotionally regulate. And I want you to think about this for a minute, and I really want you to reflect. How do you or whoever's at home regulate their emotions? Because I guarantee you that you will see that your child is a mirror of your behaviors. If you're an anxious parent, you will have an anxious child. You will have an anxious baby. You will have an anxious toddler. If you are an aggressive person, if you respond aggressively to your spouse or the kids, you will find that your child will start to be that mini person. If you're on the phone and you hang up on people or you shout or you do something, you know, your child will start to do that. Sometimes we don't think that our kids really pick up on these things, but they do. Sponges, everything is being picked up. And another thing that I will say is often what parents do is they might have a bit of an explosion. They might have an argument at home. There might be a bit of tension. They notice someone's listening to us in the corner, one of the kids is here, and then they'll just stop. Okay, so your child has seen you explode, has seen you not be able to control your emotions, and then they don't see what you do about it. So as a result, you're left with a child who thinks, oh, okay, that's it. I just have to shout and scream and then nothing else happens. What they don't see is you probably sitting down, taking a few deep breaths, having a cup of tea, doing whatever you need to do to regulate, going for a walk, speaking to your partner, apologizing, reflecting. Your kids need to see the whole circle. It's okay for them to see your emotions, or maybe those negative emotions or the emotions we perceive as negative, but they also need to see how you regulate. And that might be you as a parent exaggerating. It might be you saying, I'm so angry right now in the traffic. I'm so frustrated. What am I going to do about it? I need to think. I need to label my emotion. I need to say out loud, I'm angry. Check. I need to now do one of my strategies. What strategies can I do? I'm going to do my deep breathing. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to draw it. You know, your child needs to see you doing those things if you expect them to. As it says here, how you identify and respond to stressors is exactly how your child will do it. So I know I've hovered on this slide, but it really is the most important thing. And when we have younger kids and when I get referrals for very young kids and we talk about emotional regulation, it's parent coaching. It's how a parent can adapt. I work with some parents who are very structured, who don't like change. And then we wonder why in school, kids are very upset with transitions. They're not flexible. They don't like to share. They don't like to win or lose. So you need to be mindful of what kind of parent and what kind of strategies you're currently using if we want to really understand how our kids are. Number 5, the last part, is building a toolbox of strategies. Now, this is not, as I mentioned, for those of you who may have joined late, this is not a box, like a real life, practical box. This is strategies that you can explore to see what works for your child. For lots of kids that I work with, I like them to identify where their body is. So, you know, teachers might use things in school like the zones of regulation. So you might hear your kids saying, I'm in the green zone, I'm in the blue zone, I'm in the red zone. For a lot of kids, I like to do this. I like to say, are you running too high, too fast, or just right? Too high, too low, or just right? They need to be able to identify where their engines are or where their body is. How fast is it moving or how slow is it moving? If they're able to pick a strategy. There are many different strategies. I would say the the key strategies that we would promote in therapy are things like self-reflection, deep breathing. Now, we love to talk about breathing as therapists, but don't bypass breathing as a parent. You know, there's lots of apps like the Calm app. There's lots of mindful meditations and breathing exercises on YouTube that you can work through. But breathing is the single and fastest way to calm down, to get rid of that fight or flight response. It's how we breathe, is how we can calm the body down. And we need to teach our kids. I have seen 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds doing meditation hands and their deep breathing. So it does work, but we do need to start our kids to do it, and you need to do it if you want your kid to do it. Lots of different things that you can do. As an occupational therapist, I use a lot of movement. So if I feel kids are running too fast or they have too much energy, I might do movement breaks. If I want to calm a child down, and here's where I'll bring in a bit of my OT. So when we talk about movement breaks and strategies, there are and this is a very general summary, but there's 2 different ways of looking at it. There are very alerting activities and there are very organizing and calming activities. Alerting activities are activities that wake up our brain. So jumping jacks, sprinting, spinning around, these things are very alerting. So if you have a child that's quite frustrated or maybe overexcited and you say, okay, just have a movement break, do it 10 spins or run up and down, you might find that your child will come back more excited because you're engaging in more alerting activities with them. Whereas if you ask your child to do a calming activity like breathing or like doing some heavy work, and I love the word heavy work, here it is. Heavy work is really regulating. So if we ask our kid to do wall push-ups or chair push-ups, or can you lift this really heavy box for dad? Can you wash the car for me? Because that's heavy work, that's moving our muscles. Can you do your animal walks? Can you walk like a bear, bounce like a frog? You're really activating your muscles. So when we talk about heavy work, there's a word that us therapists use called proprioception. And that is a sense that not many people know about it. But proprioception is our self of awareness of where our body is in space. So when we do heavy work, we trigger those receptors that are in our muscles that have a calming effect. They're releasing those calming hormones. And I bring this back to adults sometimes. If you go to the gym, sometimes you'll find that if you do a spinning class, you might feel more active. Whereas if you go and lift weights, you might feel like some of your stress has been released. I want you now to think of the same concept for kids, what that might be. It can be heavy work for the hands. It can be pulling things apart. It can be rolling, therapy putty, Play-Doh, carrying something, wheelbarrow walking, tug-of-war, okay? Hope that makes sense. So before I finish, and I think we're good for time, we're doing well, my top tips for you guys to take away as parents are, and please feel free to take a picture or a screenshot of this if you want, but you really need to implement a really warm and responsive relationship with your child. And what I mean by this is, if you're that parent who always says, why are you angry? Don't be angry. There's no need to be angry. I need you to remember that you're not helping your child. You might think that you are helping your child calm down, but what you're really saying to your child is, I don't believe you. You shouldn't be angry, and you're not angry. And it's very invalidating for a child. So instead, you need to say things like, I know that you're really angry. That must be really difficult for you. Or I can see that you're extremely excited now. You're moving your body, you're shaking. I can see that we're really overwhelmed. But you need to start using those words and validate. Remember, we're validating the feelings, not the behaviors. So your child has the right to feel any way they want, any single emotion that they want. They do not have the right to behave any way they want, but they can feel. So always validate the feelings, not the behaviors. Next, I want you to use everyday situations to promote regulation strategies. That could be waiting in the car. That could be looking at their favorite program or whatever app they're playing and asking them about the characters. How do you think he's feeling? What emotion does he have? Anything like that you can do to use those strategies. Even you just self-talk, making up scenarios, role play, so that your child can help learn the strategies. Support your child in identifying a higher goal. So we want our kids and our friends to identify the bigger picture. So by saying things like, you know, what do you think will happen if you don't share any of your toys? Your friends might not want to play with you, and I think that you want to have friends. Or what do you think will happen if you push them boys every day? What do you think will happen if we use our hands and we push things away? It might get our anger away, but do you think those friends will want to play with us the next day? Do you think that they'll be avoiding us, or do you think they'll want to play? So we always want to look at the bigger picture. Next, more is caught than thought. That's what we said. We want you guys as parents to model the behavior that you want to see. Toolbox for managing emotions that we just went through. We want to validate the challenge, validation for the kids. I know you're feeling this way. I'm here. I hear you. Remember that by saying no need to be worried, no need to be angry, no need, we're teaching our kids that you're not listening. You know, kid is thinking, you know, you're not hearing me. I am worried about this and I want to be worried. And never mock their emotions. Okay, no matter how small they are. They might be worried that someone will laugh at their cut on their knee. Okay, but we don't want to invalidate that. We want to say, oh, that must make you really worried, but what can we do when we're worried? Let's talk about it. So validate any single emotion, no matter how small it is. And remember that children do not have a fully functioning frontal lobe, as I mentioned. So they will have to borrow yours, and you need to be mindful of that. So when you see your child dysregulated, I want you to put that other cap on and say, this is a learning opportunity. This is a behavior. My child is trying to communicate me, and I need to support them. Here are some resources that we have up, just in case any of you would like to take a picture or have a screenshot. It's just to kind of give you an idea. The Zones of Regulation is a program teachers use. Some of them are webinars, some of them are like Cookie Monster, self-regulation, emotional regulation, lots of YouTube things on how different characters. Sesame Street have lots of really nice ideas. Lots of lovely books out there as well for teaching emotions. Daniel and the Tiger is a really nice one as well for younger kids to understand what emotions look like. And that's the resources slide. So I'm going to open up for questions. Maybe some of you want to type in a question. Maybe some of you want to ask me, but I'm happy to try my best to answer them. For those of you who enjoyed today and who would maybe like to link up with us or kind of check out any of our other platforms, these are our platforms. We have quite a few, so I will run through them quickly for you. We have at the Lighthouse Arabia on Instagram is our main platform. We also have Lighthearted Parenting, that is for parents, parenting strategies, vlogs, we share that kind of thing there. Dr. Saliha Alfridi is our managing director here at the Lighthouse Arabia. So more, I would say, she does do quite a lot of parenting things, but also for you, if you want to learn a bit more about how you can regulate and your own emotions and controlling those and mindfulness and all of those things, she has amazing videos and she does a lot of live sessions as well. Smart Heart board game is a board game that we sell here. It was developed by one of our clinicians, really useful in getting the family talking through a game about emotions. You can check that out on our website as well. And TikTok, for those of you who know what TikTok is, I am on TikTok for the Lighthouse, and I run with two of my colleagues a platform for teenagers, so supporting teens who are going through mental health difficulties and kind of talking about some key topics there as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If any of you want to turn your cameras on, please feel free. I see maybe I have some questions. I'm going to get through those now. What causes poor emotional regulation? Well, I guess you have to think about it from a point that your child's age and developmental stage. How much exposure do they have? What is the lifestyle like at home? What are they looking at? What are they responding to? But it can be anything. It really can be. Usually with emotional regulation skills, it's that they just haven't built those skills yet. A lot of it comes down to opportunities. How many opportunities have I given my child to build their emotional regulation skills? So just like, say, for example, kids who have feeding difficulties or kids who have motor difficulties or fine motor strength problems, how many opportunities has that child had to practice that skill? Because we don't learn any skill in the book unless we repeat that skill and we work on that skill. So I hope that answers your question. Could there be many triggers? Absolutely. There can be lots of different triggers. But sometimes the trigger might not be the situation. It could be, for example, denied access to something. So when the word no can be a big trigger for kids. No, don't touch that. You have to go, no, you can't go to bed. You don't have that. So those, it's not that the situation might be the trigger. It could just be that the words could be the trigger. So be mindful of that as well. For kids, for those of you who might have kids that struggle with no or don't, I want you to think about not using those words. So instead of saying, don't put your feet on the couch, you just say, let's keep our feet on the floor. Let's keep our shoes where they're meant to be. I always want you to try and use your language to talk about the positive behaviors and the behaviors that you want to see, rather than the behaviors that you don't want to see. How can I teach my 7-year-old son to overcome overreacting? I think that really goes down to what they're overreacting to, and it goes down to that kind of control. Now, this might not just be emotional regulation, it could be self-regulation. So we have to be mindful that emotional regulation is controlling our emotions, but self-regulation is kind of that umbrella that comes over emotional regulation, but that also includes things like managing impulsivity, responding in a certain way, exposure to things. So I guess we really need to teach our kids and break down, and a lot of the time we're overreacting. I'm thinking of the kids that I work with who are kind of quite intense in overreacting to things. We need to plan for it properly. We need to set the expectation. We need to talk it through first. So once you know the triggers, you need to break those down. You need to give them the doses of the things that they overreact to in small doses, and then praise that behavior and teach them that kind of scaffolding technique as well. Next question I have, how to best react when my child is pushing boundaries and not accepting no. It sometimes leads to a small punishment. Okay, really good question. I would say, and it's hard to answer that question without knowing your child, but I will answer as best I can. I would say that you need to be mindful of your language. If no is the trigger, then we just don't use no. Again, we say the behavior that we want to see instead of the one that we don't. But I would say be mindful of, you know, how you respond to your child. So, and this comes back to the escalation trap. Usually kids and adults, you know, we push boundaries. If you know that your partner or your sister or your brother will eventually give in and give you something, you're going to keep pushing them because it pays off. We all know that person who you just need to ask 10 times and eventually they will agree to doing the thing for you. But kids learn the same way. So they learn that if no does not really mean no from mom or dad, then I'm going to keep pushing. So every time you say to your child, fine, one more game on your Minecraft, 5 more minutes playing with your sister. Okay, you can have one more cookie. What you're teaching is that the first time that I said no, or you can't have that, I didn't mean anything. So imagine your kids are all sitting at the couch and you say, dinner's ready, everybody sit at the table. Nobody responds. The kids are all watching TV. Then you come in again. Guys, come and sit at the table now. Did you not hear me? Nobody moves. Then you come in and you raise your voice and you say, everybody to the kitchen. Your kids run in. But your kids are conditioned to respond that way because they know that the first and the second time that you ask them, you won't do anything about it. Whereas the third time is when they see you explode. So I would say be very consistent. No means no. 5 minutes means 5 minutes. And we call this, what do we call it? An extinction burst of behaviors, okay? So when you start doing this and you start being, you know, that parent who's really following through on their words, you will see that your kid will explode. It's called an extinction burst in behavioral terms. So your kid will actually explode and the behaviors will get worse because they're going way up to see how much they have to go for you to cave. But I promise you that if you are consistent and stick with what you've said, that your child will eventually learn, maybe not straight away, it does take time, that actually there's just no point in arguing because I'm not going to get it. You know, I had a parent in last week who said to me, we have lots of difficulties at home with her son and behavior. And she said, you know, it's really strange because he doesn't do it with his dad. Like when I'm in the mall with him, he runs away and he screams and shouts. But for some reason, when he's with his dad, he just doesn't do that. And when I spoke to dad and we explored it, we just learned that it was very simple, that dad just never gives in. So the kid has learned that when dad says you can't have that, he just knows that there's no point in pulling or running because that's no. So just be mindful of that. Hope that answers your question. Okay, my daughter has selective mutism. She's 11. At school, teachers find it very difficult to know her emotions. Her face stays very still and they can't find out if the lesson is difficult or if she feels sad or if she feels something. I can understand that she freezes at those moments. How can I help her to feel free and to show her emotions that are accepted and beautiful? What a lovely question. I would kind of go back to with selective mutism. I would say it is, and I'm sure you're probably gone to therapy or you've kind of got training in it, but you know, I've definitely worked very closely with a lot of psychologists who have worked with kids, older kids and young kids with selective mutism. And often it is around, you know, sometimes we do need therapy. We do need to look at it from a deeper point of view. We do need to look at kind of techniques like gradual exposure and communication techniques. Often kids who have selective mutism work with psychology and speech therapy to look at alternative ways to communicate until maybe they do communicate. But I would say something in the interim would be to kind of speak to your daughter at home about what she can do to communicate her feelings in school and what she feels comfortable doing. So that might be having, like, I know one of the schools I'm in, we have some kids, similar age, who will have like a sign on their desk and they have like a card and one side is green and one side is red. So when they're feeling really happy and they're feeling good, the card is red, or green. So teacher just walks by and they don't have to speak. They know, they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want any kind of target on them. But when they're feeling a little bit anxious or worried or confused, they turn it and they have a different color. So teacher automatically knows that I need to re-explain things, or I need to offer a sensory break. I need the whole class to maybe, I need to have, you know, I need to offer that child something. So I would say, see what your child feels comfortable with, you know, having secret signs almost with her teacher, so that she feels comfortable, and also kind of building that confidence that she has to maybe ask for a break and she can write it down or she can draw it or she can show teacher a card. I think would be really important to communicate that. And also being mindful of, maybe you can speak to her and kind of talk about emotions at home and how is she feeling, and maybe she's not feeling an emotion at school. Maybe she's happy, maybe she's content. But I think it's important for you to know, is she not being expressive at school? Is there anything going on? Or maybe she's just very content. So I would just be mindful and kind of keep it in the home environment at the start, because that's where she's comfortable. How to teach kids to appreciate what they have? That's a really good question. How to teach kids how to appreciate what they have? It's really hard, and I really do empathize with you. I think it's really difficult, and I think we're in a world, and especially we're in the UAE, where things are so shiny and pretty and accessible, and sometimes we do get carried away, and even as adults we get carried away, and we have to remind ourselves of what's really important and to hold on to what we have. And I guess us as adults can have those moments and we can come back down, but for kids, they don't have those executive functioning skills to come back down. So I think I would really advise kind of emotional coaching and teaching your kids about, you know, different emotions and why we're happy about things, and, you know, what are the things that we can really hold on to and that will always be there for us. And kind of a lot of social stories. There's a lot of books that can help kind of teach and dive into the world of appreciation. And also I would be mindful about what your child has access to. I work with families who are quite rigid in what they give their kids access to, and it's not about money. They can give their kids anything they want, but sometimes we have to be mindful and teach our kids how to appreciate things by not getting everything without doing something. So I would always say that, you know, if your child wants something, they want the new PS5, if they're at that age, that you want your child to understand that I'm not just going to give you the PS5. You have to work for that. And that could be from behavior. That could be from collecting tokens. That could be from teaching their younger siblings something. You know, there has to be some kind of give and take, and you will never be able to get your kids to do things for you until you can put something that really helps them in understanding that, you know, work pays days off. For older kids, I'm developing right now a webinar, a training. It will be more like a workshop on raising financially fit kids, and it's actually not about finance. It does have financial components, but it's more about teaching our kids that we need to work and we need to give to the community and we need to do more in order to actually reach our bigger goals. So those kind of, and there's actually a book on that as well, that you can look at as well. I do stick to it in most situations. However, he might be so emotional and angry about the no that he might go and try to get his brother to fight against me, or he might hurt his brother. I think that's really tricky. I think in that case, what I would do is I would set the expectations really clear. What I do with some of my kids is I'll say, okay, I'm going to tell you something right now. Before I even give them the toy. So if it's the toy and you're going to say no, I would say, if you want to play with this toy, these are the rules. So these are the behaviors I want to see you doing with your brother. These are the things we can't do. If you do the things that we can't do, I'm taking the toy for 10 minutes or 1 hour. Now, remember, if we say for the whole night, that might be too much for your child to handle. So do whatever you can to, remember I said gradual baby steps. And once you've done that, then you've set the expectation. So then when you said, I told you not to press that button or open the batteries or whatever it is, then you can say, I'm really sorry. You don't want to show anger. You don't want to have any emotions. I'm really sorry, but you know the rules. Can I please have it? You agreed that we could go. So we want to ask your child first, and then we're just going to remove that toy. We're going to say, nice waiting for 10 minutes. If I can see that you have really nice behavior and you play nicely with your brother, we can have the toy back. Okay. Now this might be, if your child is a bit older and you know they can handle it, this might be that there's no toy for the evening, but it's about setting the expectations, being really clear, being consistent and checking in on them. And I would say that when your child does it at the start, so maybe you set it up perfectly and you say, now I'm going to say no in a few minutes. And I really hope that you can accept my no. Okay. And I even, one of the kids that I work with, I accepted no tokens stuck on the fridge. So when they accept no, they get a token. And when they have 5, they get something off mom or dad. So it might be as simple as that. And you can really train them for it. So instead of saying no, you can say, remember I told you, so I'm going to tell you something now. And I'm really hoping that you respond nicely to me. So the answer is no. And then you kind of see how they react. And if that, break it down to whatever you have to. And if your child accepts no, you have to exaggerate and embellish that praise. So, wow, thank you for listening to me. That's amazing behavior. I mean, I want you guys to become cartoon characters and be so in your child's world, because then they will realize, wow, I'm getting more attention for doing the right thing than doing the other thing. Whereas I want you to think about when your child starts to get his brother on the same side, you probably react more strongly, which means that he's going to increase that behavior because he's getting more attention for it. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I have time for a few more. So I have noticed that my 7-year-old is more angry with homeschooling than normal days. How can we help them? We all hate homeschooling with parents and kids, so how can we work on that? What I would say is that that's a really tough one. I don't think there's any really easy answer to that, but I would say that accept that homeschooling is really difficult. And I would say, and we're always telling parents to, increase their expectations and believe in your kids. But what I would say to you is manage your expectations. If you're expecting your child to do all of these things and they just can't handle it, we have COVID, we have uncertainty, they're not seeing their friends, we have emotions that are coming up. You need to decrease the expectations. That might mean, okay, you can't do all of this, but I'm going to contact teacher and see what are the things that we really need to do today. And there might be days that you just cannot do it and you think, I'm just not here today and I can't parent. And it's okay to have those days. Go easy on yourself and understand that there are days that you are not going to want to help your kids with homeschooling. You do not have the time and they are just done with it, but we have to validate that feeling. We have to validate that it is really hard, that it's really hard, but we just want to try and break it down a little bit as much as they can. I would say have lots of movement breaks, make home as fun as possible. So every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes, depending on the age of your child, we want to have movement breaks. We want to see them up and down. We want to see them building a little mini obstacle course. We want to see, jumping jacks, doing the jobs for you. Break it up, because usually when we see increase in emotions, it's because we haven't had a chance to chip away at them and get them out, outlets. So create outlets for your child to just release, and then have like check-ins, you know, how's our emotions, how's our engine running? For example, you look like you're a bit too high. I think we need a break from study. Let's go back to it when we're feeling just right. Hope that helps. When I tell my child to go somewhere to calm down, he might not go and he might kick the door. Very normal, because when we're in the moment, when we're in that red zone, we're not thinking, okay, there is nothing. I'm just going to do something that gets rid of my anger. And I've seen adults do this as well. Okay, when someone tells you, like, can you imagine if you're furious and someone tells you, can you just take a deep breath, or can you just go into the tent there in the corner and calm down? You are going to respond worse. Some of us, not saying that's me, of course, but some of us do respond like that. So you have to be mindful that in that moment is red zone. We want to try and catch our kids when they're coming up to the red zone. So I know that you're getting angry. I see that you're annoyed. I can see that your engine's getting redder. And that's when we want to encourage the strategies. And if you won't engage in it in the moment, I want you to validate. I want you to say, I know you're really angry. I feel that you're so frustrated right now. I'm just going to let you calm down, and you're ignoring that behavior. Unless it's unsafe. I know when it's unsafe and there's siblings involved, you have to block the behavior. But if you feel that, you know, it's just he's going to have his little moment, you say to him, I'm over here and I love you so much and I'm ready to talk to you whenever you're calm. But I'm not going to talk to you when you're like this. And maybe you're going in and you're doing their favorite thing in the kitchen or playing their game. But when they can come back in and they do use their words and they do speak nicely, we want to really validate that. Thank you so much, guys.